Hello, friends, and welcome to this live edition of Syracuse Sports. You got Brent, you got Emily Leiker. We got some big things happening. There is a story that has got us all buzzing today, Emily, and we are going to get to the bottom of this today, and that is who is coming to the JMA Wireless Dome. Major concert announcement tomorrow. Nobody knows who it is, and we are not getting off this feed until we figure it out.
I have a guess. We were just talking about this in the newsroom, actually.
Give me your guess.
Metallica and like 3 other bands are coming to town on some like random tour. My dad sent this to me a week ago.
Okay.
There wasn't a location announced yet, but it's like an April show, and they're not going to play outside in April in Syracuse. So I think it's Metallica.
Well, they already announced Metallica. That's already know that one. That's already been announced. Yes.
Damn.
So we do know that.
I saw the date was announced, but it didn't have a location on it.
No, they did announce Metallica, but there are some other major concert tours that are going to be out there next year. So
Oasis?
See, I don't think this is Oasis, but Oasis is doing a lot of major stadiums next year. I don't know. Now, here there is a football side of this. That's, by the way, that's not why we're doing the show, guys. I was just joking. But while we're here, there actually is a football connection. Don McPherson, former Syracuse quarterback, is going to be at the press conference on tomorrow is Thursday to announce whatever this air quotes major concert is. Yes, that is true. Yes.
Interesting.
So if you want to play the Why is Don McPherson game there, at first I thought, okay, well, he was number 9. Is this Billy Joel's 9th show at the Dome?
That's a popular guess in the newsroom.
But I think ultimately it is going to be Billy Joel. It is his 8th show. It would be number 8. Number 9. Which
I would love to see Billy Joel.
Billy Joel, he's got a banner in the Dome. Frequent guest. He
does.
Don McPherson played for the Eagles. The Eagles do currently have a residency at the Sphere in Las Vegas, and I believe are going to be still touring next year. And if you really want to stretch it out, U2's on tour next year. Their big album, Joshua Tree, came out in 1987. Don McPherson, of course, had an amazing 1987 season where he should have won the Heisman Trophy at Syracuse. So, I don't know.
Wow, you slipped in the Sphere, which obviously has a geographical tie to the football thing we're going to talk about.
And where we will be next week, something else we'll talk about on the show today. So anyway, we're getting off track, but everybody's buzzing about that in Syracuse today. Who's the next big show coming to the Dome? Okay. Let's recap briefly, Emily, for those that are like, what's the deal here? So we got 2 big things we want to talk about today. One is that what was supposed to be future Syracuse opponent Matthew Sluka, the quarterback at UNLV, announces this morning that he is walking away from the football program, what has clearly become an NIL dispute, and now through the day, as it is 1:11 p.m. Eastern time as we speak, the details are coming out. NIL collectives are saying one thing, his agents are saying another. It's an anticipated kind of he said everywhere game that we will look at here, and just the ramifications of this in college football in general. And here you have a future Syracuse opponent right around the corner in a major game at Allegiant Stadium next week in Vegas that lost their starting quarterback today to certainly modern issues in college sports. And Elijah Robinson, Syracuse defensive coordinator, talked about the 4th and 9 play a little bit. So Emily and I wanted to just kind of update some current Syracuse football things coming up here. But let me pop it on the screen for those that haven't seen, Emily. This is the tweet, okay? So this morning, Matthew Sluka puts out a graphic that says thank you, and on the other side of it says, I have decided to utilize my redshirt year and will not be playing in any additional games this season. I committed to UNLV based on certain representations that were made to me, which were not upheld after I enrolled. Despite discussions, it became clear that these commitments would not be fulfilled in the future. I wish my teammates the best of luck this season and hope for the continued success of the program. So right away, we know someone didn't get paid. Like, you can see right through what he was saying there. As the day goes on, Pete Thamel, ESPN College Football Insider, former UNLV quarterback Matthew Sluka's NIL representation, Marcus Cromartie of Equity Sports, told ESPN that Sluka was verbally promised a minimum of $100,000 from a UNLV assistant coach for transferring there. None of that money was paid per Cromartie. Ross Dellinger, Yahoo Sports Insider, notes Rob Sine, CEO of Blueprint Sports, which operates UNLV's collective, tells Yahoo that the collective never agreed to a $100,000 deal with quarterback Matthew Sluka. It made a payment of $3,000 to Sluka, and we're discussing a monthly payment of $3,000 before the quarterback's decision this week. So the key detail in there, Emily, a verbal agreement, which was made, according to other reports out there, by an assistant coach. So what we're seeing here is a situation where no one was on the same page, promises were made, not kept, and a quarterback, in order to maintain his eligibility for another redshirt year, which you would have to do the 4-game limit there, walks away from a 3-0 football team and could be on track for the college football playoff in the group of 5 if they keep this up. Boy, what a 2024 story we're talking about here.
Yeah, the big lesson is always get any agreement in writing. Always, even if it's on a napkin in a car, if you have it on writing, like that's going to help so much in a scenario like this. But unfortunately, like this is probably one of the biggest cases of this so far in the NIL era. But players being promised money that is not already collected or not already available to a program is not a novel concept. Like I would factor to guess that actually most of the big contract deals you've like seen players get, save for some of the top programs in the country that have a lot of money consistently rolling in, like they're promised those numbers first, and then collectives, whatever else, have to increase donations and have to go fundraise. I mean, I feel pretty confident saying that's like what happened with McCord and his NIL deal here, is that you saw the SU football NIL group had to go out and find new deals with businesses and stuff like that to be able to bankroll that. So this is an unfortunate situation. I don't think UNLV's, particularly the assistant coach who made that promise, the collective, like I don't know that anyone looks very good in this situation. It's certainly a little bit interesting to me that Sluka chose to play 3 games when it feels like this had been months ongoing. I think I saw somewhere that this promise was made in February, which was, if I can do math right, more than 5 months ago, 7 months ago.
Yeah.
And so like you have 7 months of not getting paid, and you like, it kind of feels like, why didn't he choose to hold out at the start of the season, entering the season? Because now like he's helped them build like a good record and like be a national conversation to a point. Like if he hadn't, like they might have had a completely different first 3 weeks of the season if he had chosen to do this 3 weeks earlier.
No question about it. And there was a great a couple of our Syracuse Sports Insiders, and we're going to hear from you guys coming up here shortly, said, well, he just doesn't want to play Syracuse, right? He transfers out of Holy Cross, and then he leaves Holy Cross the week before Syracuse goes to UNLV. He's just trying to avoid Syracuse is what this whole thing is about. But there's a lot of lessons in caution here, Emily, through this whole thing. Let's keep in mind, we mentioned the verbal agreement, get it in writing, and that's a lesson you can apply to a lot of things in life. But the collectives, remember, this is who you're dealing with. So coaches, when NIL conversations come up, they have to defer to collectives. They don't have a bag of money. Back in the day they did, in, the backroom deals, but it's not like, yeah, kid, we got $100,000. Here it is. Sign on the dotted line. It's like, no, we have this collective. Oh, how much do you need? Okay. So let the collective know how much you need. And it's this whole process, right? Like Syracuse didn't pay Kyle McCord. It was boosters. It was NIL. It was, you said, Syracuse football NIL, and certain local businesses that stepped up when they knew what the number was. Okay. This is what Kyle McCord is asking for. That's what he got. By the way, he's been paid, so nobody has to worry about that here in Syracuse. I have that on good authority, okay? This is the process you're dealing with here. This is why the House NCAA settlement needs to go through, according to a lot of people in college football. It's why, and John Wildhack has been hesitant to talk about this because it's still in litigation, but they want all this in-house, right? Syracuse wants, and every school out there wants to bring the collectives in-house, have it been run by the school, which of course forever has been a huge no-no in the college sports landscape, but now to streamline it. And this, Emily, might become I don't know, like the Ed O'Bannon case, or, Kurt Flood in baseball and free agency. Like, Matt Sluka might be the guy to step forward. There are certainly other football players and other athletes that are in this situation that maybe they were promised something that they're not getting. I forget the name of the quarterback at Florida who ended up suing Billy Napier, the head coach, because he didn't get what he was promised, right? So there's other cases out there, but Sluka, you look at it, and initially, Emily, this is how fast the world moves here. Like, initially, people are like, oh, this guy quit on his team, and he just wants money. But then when the details start to come out, and they're still coming out as we speak here, there's a lot more defense of the athlete these days, right? And the money and people are saying, well, what would you do if you didn't get the money you were promised and paid? And then it's like, well, it wasn't in writing. And it's like this whole big discussion that's out there. In short, in a nutshell, we're still in the Wild West here when it comes to NIL and college sports, as much as it's changed.
And we're going to be for another several years. This is not going to be something that shakes out quickly. And I think we've all known that. And it's something that people have such strong opinions around on both ends and all this stuff. And, there's been plenty of commentary today just about like, oh, well, college sports is ruined because we're promising a quarterback 100,000 now and blah, 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 blah. But also like, look at the financial stuff that UNLV is trying to negotiate with the Pac-12 and the Mountain West, which is
that too.
Big story. Like UNLV has two huge storylines now going on this week that are in the two biggest talking or like discussion groups of college football right now with NIL and conference realignment. So this is certainly going to be a case that you hear about, that we continue to hear about. I'm sure Sluka will advocate and talk about this and kind of be like a vocal NIL guy, or at least you'd kind of hope, because he's taken a pretty aggressive stand and, not everyone chooses to. I do think sometimes it can be an embarrassing situation to say, hey, I agreed to some money, but didn't do it the right way. And now I'm not getting that money. But he's chosen to speak up. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out kind of in that frame of things. And obviously interesting for when we head to Vegas next week, because he was doing a lot for that UNLV offense.
I just love the irony of this too, Emily. Matt Sluka, certainly not the only young man in history that went to Vegas with dreams of making a lot of money and didn't quite get what he was thinking, right? But it is literally a gamble when you're taking people's word for it. And we'll pay you this, and you're not getting what and when there's not a express written contract that you can go to and say, hey, look, you were supposed to pay me X amount of dollars by this time. Of course you can kick the can down the road. It reminds me of, that movie A Bronx Tale, when that guy owed him C, who was the young kid in the movie. Somebody owed him $20 and he was trying to chase him down the whole movie, right? It's these mobsters like, hey, where's my money, right? If it is not in writing, and how do you put these things in writing these days? Because you're trusting collectives and what are the rules on this? And of course, there are people out there, great guy, former guest on this show, and somebody who runs the Bull Collect out there, the great Nick Carparelli, responded to me and said, the NCAA has got to streamline these things, and people are talking about collective bargaining, and these athletes have to have, contracts and labor deals just like professional athletes do. I mean, that's all well and good, but Emily, the NCAA has been sued into oblivion. We mentioned the House versus NCAA case. That's just one of them out there. Reggie Bush out there recently this week suing for back pay for NIL and all these things. The NCAA, I mean, they're toothless in this whole thing. All of a sudden, they're going to drop the hammer and regulate this after they opened the floodgates to this. Let's not forget, in 2021, there was a Supreme Court case that they lost 9-0. Now, that was not about NIL. It was about a different form of payment. But the warning from that lawsuit, I remember Brett Kavanaugh, one of the Supreme Court justices, basically saying, like, don't come back here with this or you're going to lose again. And a month later, you know what happened? All of a sudden, NIL was a thing. All of a sudden, the floodgates opened with no regulation whatsoever. So how are you going to put the toothpaste back in the tube? The NCAA, they had their chance. They had their chance for years and had lobbyists and spent millions of dollars fighting student athletes from earning NIL money. So they're the ones that are going to regulate that? I don't think so. Like, nice try on that. Nick, I respect your opinion and anybody out there that's saying it, but how can they regulate it when they're the ones that screwed this whole thing up in the first place? I just don't see how they can do that.
Yeah, it's just a messy situation all around. I will go back to an earlier point about, we were talking, obviously, it was an assistant coach. I don't think we have a name on what assistant coach, but it was an assistant coach who supposedly made the verbal promise on this money. And I will say that's why you see a lot of programs adding general managers to their staff, right? Which Syracuse football did. That's why they brought in Nate McNeil, is to have someone who is not an on-field coach, who has more of the business perspective, who has more of the roster management's experience, to be the in-between between, okay, coaching staff wants this guy out of the transfer portal or wants this 5-star recruit, this 4-star recruit. They're going to take that to the general manager, and then the general manager is typically, from what we understand, Syracuse has been a little shy about telling us specifics, but from what we understand, then goes to the collectives and deals with the collective heads. And it's like, okay, this is who they're looking for. This is how much we think it's going to cost. And then they can go back and forth from there. But that takes the coaches out of it, who already have so many other things on their plate. I don't know if UNLV has a general manager. I should have poked that out before getting into this, but I'll be curious to see how programs continue to try to navigate this by doing things like that and adding personnel, especially like staff increases in college football, like finding ways that they can kind of like self-regulate or self-protect as this gets into a messier situation until there's some resolution reached, which I could sit here and try and tell you what resolution I think is going to be reached, and it would probably be wrong because, like I said, this is going to be years down the line, like a 2-3 plus, I would guess, before any of this is really resolved.
There will be lawyers, as the expression goes. Michael C., one of our Syracuse Sports Insiders, agrees with you, Emily. Says, I see more general manager types on coaching staffs in the future, similar to the recent hire in the basketball program. She brought up Nate McNeil for football. Syracuse basketball recently brought in Alex Klein, who worked for the Knicks as a scout, had a great recruiting website back in the day. He was doing this when he was in high school, then came to Syracuse and was kind of known in the recruiting community. And he is tapped into that world. He knows about recruiting. He knows about the portal. There are NIL valuations out there. On3 recently put out their updated NIL valuation list. And Kyle McCord was on that list, Emily. I believe he's 37th on that list, and his evaluation was over $1 million. Syracuse is recruiting Kion Anthony, Carmelo Anthony's son, who's one of the primary class of 2025 recruits. He was on that list, right? So you have transfers, you have recruits. There's a difference sometimes in what they get promised, but now you have these athletes that can go to lists like this and essentially negotiate. Well, this is what On3 says I'm worth, which, by the way, like that's an estimate. We don't know that for sure, but that's where kind of the negotiations begin. These general managers, and think about how we talked about general managers in pro sports for so long and what they do. They're not signing players, but they're certainly going through the business aspect of it. So when a transfer or a recruit comes in and NIL comes up, now a Fran Brown could say, okay, you see that office right over there? Go talk to Nate. Now Adrian Autry could say, yes, we okay, NIL, great. Alex Klein, he's our GM. He handles that. You guys go talk about that. So a coach doesn't have to make that promise. We're hearing, if it's accurate, and I have no reason to believe it's not, that you have a UNLV assistant coach who made a verbal promise, probably based on what he thought they could get, what the collective is. But now we're figuring out that he couldn't deliver on that because Sluka walked away with the thought that he is not going to get that money. So Syracuse is in that game. Other programs are in that game. Duke was the first to do it, if I'm not mistaken. I know they were one of the first. Emily, that was like 2 years ago. So that's how fast this world is moving, because now everybody is going to have a GM, not only in-house, but you're going to have GMs for several sports. It's not just like you're the GM of all the major sports. Right. Like a lot of the major profit sports are going to need their own general managers, as Syracuse has gotten into themselves.
Yeah. We'll get into it more next week, but obviously Syracuse UNLV now looks a little different, feels a little different. I'm sure like we'll know 80 more news things about this Sluka situation by next week. But I wanted to point out today, like Sluka not only is leading them in passing, obviously as their quarterback, but he's leading them in their rushing attack too.
Yes.
So like they are going to have to make some massive offensive adjustments. The three guys behind Sluka in that run game are Greg Burrell, Kylan James, and Michael Allen. And just a quick look at the stat, it looks like they've been using them pretty interchangeably. Those guys all have about the same amount of attempts and same amount of yardage. So that's gonna be interesting. It's gonna look a lot different. I'm excited to dive into it a little bit more, and we'll be on the ground in Vegas earlier, so I think we'll definitely talk about it in this forum with you guys and have some more info next week. But Syracuse just lost 3 weeks of tape on UNLV's offense because it's going to look completely different for next week.
Sluka did not get there until July. He did not go through spring practice for UNLV. Haj Malik Williams was another transfer that came in from Campbell. And I've only seen a little bit of film of him, Emily, but he is fast. So here you had Sluka, who you brought up, has really been counted on to make plays with his feet. He's only a 43% passer, I believe, at this point. He was certainly he did this at Holy Cross, too. I mean, he just big physical guy that is going to try and run you over. From what I've seen of the backup that I'm assuming is going to get in there in Malik Williams, he can move. So he brings a lot of the same elements to the table that Sluka did. But you just brought this up from a football standpoint for Syracuse, and I don't want to hear from the coaches out there on Twitter. Stop looking past Holy Cross. Like, come on, guys. Give me a break. Like, UNLV's in the news today, and I think Syracuse has the Holy Cross game plan handled here. But when they get to that game, which is already, it's a short week, it's a unique thing, Emily. It kind of feels like a bowl game. You're playing in an NFL stadium on a Friday night, 9:00 kickoff on the East in a huge city, right? Like, this is not just your typical non-conference game. It feels bigger than that. And now from a football standpoint, you got a whole new thing to game plan for if you're Syracuse when you thought you had one thing in mind, which happens all the time. People get hurt and you have to change strategies, and teams that you're not familiar with are going to throw wrinkles at you all the time. But if anything, Syracuse got a head start on this and it got an advantage on the game plan for next week with Sluka's announcement.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you get an extra 3 days probably that I bet they're in their offices today, kind of already starting to go over this, at least in passing. Like you said, I'm sure they've got their Holy Cross game plan down pat, and no one needs to be up in arms about that and looking ahead too much. But you're right. Like they leave like midweek for Vegas next week. So it's like going to be a very atypical week, coming off a Saturday game, going into their Sunday film session, and then like 2 days at home. And then you're on the road to a big city for a cross country, what we might add, in a different time zone, which is an adjustment in itself for a Friday night game. So
one of two trips they're taking out there, the other one being Cal later on in the schedule. By the way, programming note, before Emily and I talk a little bit about what Elijah Robinson said last night on that 4th and 9 call that people just can't shake. We are going to be in Vegas. Vegas, baby. Woo! Vegas. Emily and I, along with the amazing Scott Trimble, our photographer, videographer, we're going to Vegas. I don't have the details on this yet. We're actually going to meet today and put some things together. So I'll certainly let you guys know. We'll let our Syracuse Sports Insiders know. But here's what we know. We're going to be in Vegas. We would love to see you guys. We would love to meet up with you guys. We're going to be bouncing around town, doing some things. We're getting there a day early. We're going to arrive a week from today, as a matter of fact. We're going to get to Vegas. So we'll have Thursday. The game is not till Friday night, 6 o'clock local time, 9 o'clock Eastern time. So, look, it's Vegas, man. We're going to have some fun. We're going to be around. So we'll give you more details as they come, but send us, especially our Syracuse Sports Insiders, you guys that are going to be there. Let us know where you're going to be, what you're going to be doing. Throw some ideas at us. We would love to meet up with you, see you out there in Vegas. There's going to be a lot of Syracuse fans there. So just a little hint, a little tease at what's coming, that the syracuse.com crew will be there, and we were looking forward to seeing our Syracuse Sports Insiders and all the Syracuse fans out there in Vegas next week. Okay, Now, before we take that step forward to Vegas and Holy Cross this weekend, Emily, Elijah Robinson, Syracuse defensive coordinator, had his first chance last night. He didn't speak after the game on Saturday. The assistant coaches typically don't. But in this world now we live in where, and thankfully, the assistant coaches are available to talk to us and kind of explain their side of things a little bit, because Dino Babers was the lone spokesman for the coaching staff in the previous administration. Everybody's still got that 4th and 9 call on their mind, right? And I don't want to litigate this thing forever, but it was interesting to hear what Robinson said. So our colleague Chris Carlson actually talked to him last night, and I would encourage you to read the whole thing and get the whole perspective on this, but just a couple of quotes from Robinson, who said, quote, 4th and 9 call, quote, it was good coverage. It works for us. They made the better play. They were one play better than us. I wouldn't go back and change anything. He also adds that Fran Brown allows us being our coordinators and assistant coaches, to do our job. Quote, we'll talk about the call. We agree with the call. We go from there. He's a great leader, so he blames himself on the coordinator. I made the call. We as a staff, at the end of the day, as a staff, have to get the job done. So remember, Fran at his Monday press conference said that he, I think his words were, he sold out Clarence Lewis. He took responsibility for it. He didn't specifically say like, oh yeah, we should have done X instead of Y, but clearly was kind of falling on the sword saying that's on me as the head coach. Robinson says wouldn't change the call, right? Just to put a bow on this whole thing, because it's time to take a step forward from it. You can't litigate it forever. When you look back on the play, Clarence Lewis, single coverage, could it have been double coverage? I mean, we can debate that forever. Robinson, with that quote, Emily, says, would have done the same thing. Trust my guy. We switched Lewis onto the Stanford receiver from Bellamy. And frankly, the next time a coach says, you know what, Brent, you're right, I should have been in cover 2 in that situation, will be the first time that happens. Coaches just don't admit failure in a public spot, and they have their reasons for that. But it was interesting to get Robinson's perspective on it and said, hey, we made the call. I'd do it again. I trust my guy. And that's what we think about it.
Yeah. And, the other resounding message about that I think we heard largely from the players last night was that game shouldn't have come down to that play regardless. Kyle talked about it. He was like, we should have scored after Devin Grant's interception. I shouldn't have thrown a pick 6. Like, there were so many other moments in that game. Because that was the last one, that's the one that gets litigated the most. I talked to Aronde and Elijah Clark, and they both said pretty similar things. And then all three of them said as well, like, yes, Fran's taking the blame for that, but like no one actually blames him, and no one's blaming anyone. Like Kyle said, he was like, that's the good thing about this is no one's pointing fingers in the locker room. So, they took that loss hard. Kyle was still pretty visibly and vocally downtrodden yesterday when he came and talked to us, and of course was getting a lot of questions about the loss again and how he handled it. But I don't think that's a bad thing, like that it's sitting with them and that they're thinking about it. But it's also a good thing that they're not blaming, they're not playing the blame game, they're not turning on each other over a single play and stuff like that. So yeah, like you said, this is us putting a bow on it. We talked on Monday about maybe not even doing anything else on it at all, just because people are going to have their opinions on that play call. And I don't think anything that anyone says at this point will change those opinions, many of which are very vehement, and I'm seeing in the comments section right now.
Which is fine, by the way. You don't have to agree with what he said.
No, you don't have to agree. You can have your opinion.
But I was just curious what he would say. Yeah.
Right. We were curious what he said. So that's ultimately why we moved forward with that. And Chris went ahead and talked to him. Like I think it was, maybe this was about something different, but I'll apply it to this. Like Kyle said about some play, when we see that situation again, like you're going to know if we actually learned from it or not. I think he was talking about the Villari interception, and he was like, next time I have to go to Villari on a play like that, you guys will see if we actually learned from that and made the correction. And, like they might not end up in this exact scenario again that they did at that 4th and 9, but there are going to be conversions that they run out in that coverage on and stuff like that, where the quarterback doesn't make the play. Clarence Lewis gets a higher jump off the ground and gets the ball on it. Like we'll see moving forward. That's going to come up, and then we can make maybe a better judgment about the call and yada yada yada. But
yeah, it's an interesting exactly. We're tying a bow on it. It's an interesting process, right? Because in this case, it's actually you had another day to stew about it because it's a Friday night, and then there was the initial post game comments afterwards. But then these guys, as Kyle McCord said, he watched the film between Friday night and Saturday morning 5 times. He couldn't sleep, and couldn't sleep for a couple days. He said because he was so upset about the loss. Watch the film, look for the mistakes, as you alluded to there, the throw to Villari and what was off there. I talked to Dan Villari, talked to Enrique Cruz. You talked to OG and Cinco, I believe, last night. Chris talked to a couple other players. Trust me, they're all still in a bad mood from what happened. And we learned Tuesday's practice is called Bloody Tuesday.
Bloody Tuesday.
Because that's when these guys get after it. That's the physical practice, the first real one of the week to go after. I think OG told you got a bloody nose at one of these practices. Like, these guys go at it. And
I was like, is there actual blood on Bloody Tuesday? And he was like, oh yeah, I had a bloody nose just last week. And I was like, okay.
Ooh, football. Ooh. But the point being, as Enrique Cruz told me about, trust me, they got the message. As Fran Brown said on Friday, when I asked him about it after the game, they got out physicaled. And I would say that a poor Holy Cross is going to have this whole message taken out on them on Saturday. I'd be stunned if Syracuse just didn't come out and run them over just because of the matchup itself. But I would venture a big bet Syracuse is going to be very physical in this football game and take out some frustrations on the Crusaders.
That was not to tease our predictions that come out tomorrow morning, I think. But that was one of the last lines of my prediction. And it was specifically about Kyle McCord, is that seeing how Kyle McCord took this and just knowing he's a guy who can count the losses he's had on like 2 hands. Like he mentioned too, like the last loss he took, he had to sit with it for 8 months because it was that loss to Michigan at Ohio State. And then the season was over because he transferred. So he in particular is going to want to come out with a big game on Saturday against Holy Cross. And I think he'll be able to manage that.
Emily, before we depart here, I did want to get some comments from our Syracuse Sports Insiders. And what are the Syracuse Sports Insiders, you ask, Brent? Well, it is the opportunity for you to text me directly, text Emily directly, our syracuse.com reporters. It's mostly me, but Emily gets in there sometimes with all kinds of insight on Syracuse football, and it's your chance to ask us your direct questions, to send me a text on anything you want to know about, your opinions. We're heading to press conferences. We'll let you know, hey, game's over. We're going to Fran Brown's press conference. What do you guys want to know? Send me a text, right? All the questions, comments, insight that you can text me directly. I send you guys texts as well. It's a great thing. We have loved the insight and commentary we get from our Syracuse Sports Insiders. Their comments are highlighted frequently on the Syracuse Sports Podcast and our post-game shows after every Syracuse football game. All you have to do is text the word orange to 315-847-3895. You get a 2-week free trial to be a Syracuse Sports Insider. See what it's all about, what we're sending you, and the questions and comments that we can go back and forth on. And then it's just $3.99 a month after that. And Michael C. had this to say from our Syracuse Sports Insiders about the general managers that we brought up earlier. We're going to see a lot more of those in the future with the Sluka story today. Jeff A. asked this question, Emily. Does the Sluka situation mark a potentially dangerous precedent where athletes may now try to renegotiate NIL mid-season based on performance?
No, because at least right now, everyone on his side of things is saying that they were not trying to renegotiate. They were just trying to get the money he was originally promised, that $100,000. And that most of the commentary that has come out has come from his agent, but I have seen a couple national reporters talk to his father as well, and a brother, I think. So multiple people are clarifying that it was not a renegotiation. It was he never got the original amount.
Now, the devil's in the details, so keep that in mind. But I will also say, no, it's not going to set that kind of precedent specific to your question, Jeff, because even in the NFL, all the performance-based incentives are after the season, right? You see it in week 17, like this guy needs 200 yards to get this bonus. I just saw a story. There was a player for the Pittsburgh Pirates that I think he needed like 6 more at bats for some kind of bonus, and Pittsburgh benched him because they didn't want to pay him $200,000 bonus or something. So in professional sports, all this is based you can't just in the middle of the year be like, yeah, my incentive-based deal here, I'm just going to sit out until I get that. So, Jeff, there's a lot of things that this Sluka thing will present as kind of a precedent and players walking away from their team because of a situation that's going on and not getting paid. But to your specific question, I don't think so. Tommy B says, my question for the UNLV quarterback, how in the world does Cromartie not get NIL money stipulated in a contract? Weird all around. So Cromartie was, we mentioned from the Pete Thamel reporting and what he was saying about what they were promised. Get it in writing. You got to get it in writing as best as you can, or get the money up front, right? Kyle McCord got the money, and other NIL players that you see. Emily, you have reported on this, and we've seen it out there. The Athletes Who Care NIL collective in Syracuse, where they get money to go out there and exchange and do community work out there. Like, I don't think a lot of these guys are going to be out there doing it if A, they haven't been paid already, or B, they don't have a trust and a confidence that it's going to come for whatever duties they have to perform.
Right.
Sean M. To me, the issue wasn't the coverage. It was switching to the Elijah Robinson thing. It was the decision to rush 3 on a 4th and 9 while putting the corner on an island. He covered well, being Clarence Lewis, but that's a long time to ask in that situation. From Michael W. says, nice to hear them communicate and accept responsibility. As Coach Leggett Jack says, we fight on. A lot of Mikes today. Mike V says his stock is really high right now, going back to Sluka. And if he figures if he's not going to get it from these guys, he'll get it from somebody next year. So there's an interesting question, Emily. I think a lot of people are like, who's going to want this guy? He walked away from his team. At the end of the day, talent wins out. And if you're desperate for a quarterback, someone's going to take him. Now, I haven't done a deep dive on JMU's roster, but remember, his old coach, Bob Chesney, out at JMU.
Yeah.
You know, there's somebody that knows his character, knows the guy, and would bring him in if he needs a quarterback next year. Jeff P. He left Holy Cross for UNLV. My conclusion is he's desperately trying to avoid someone on the Syracuse roster as he quits the week before the Syracuse game. And Dan P. says, time for contracts. Can we bring back some level of stability and consistency and can add performance to compensation better for both sides? I've seen people say that out there, Emily. Labor experts, lawyers, people that have dealt with this at a professional level. Can college, and this would be so layered and convoluted and complicated, but could they essentially negotiate some sort of collective bargaining agreement in college sports? There has been attempts when some Northwestern players threatened to sue. They wanted a collective bargaining agreement. Like, there have been people that have been trying to kind of set that precedent and fall on that sword. It hasn't quite happened yet. And as we mentioned, the House NCAA case, where they're essentially going to have to budget anywhere between, and this is the Power 4 schools mostly, but they'll have to essentially budget between like $20 and $22 million to pay out athletes from that money that they were suing for. Now, where's that money coming from every year? I mean, trust me, schools have the money. They can pay it out. They'd just rather not pay it out to the student athletes. And Emily, you brought it up earlier. Look at what we're talking about this week also with UNLV. The Pac-12 has been reborn and is taking programs from the Mountain West. And the Mountain West is trying to save itself. And all these conference realignment discussions that happen all the time in sports for, you know, the central reason of television money. So it's funny how it's happening at one level, but then a quarterback leaves a team and everybody's like, oh my God, it's ruining college sports. It's like, well, there's a whole process to this thing.
Right. Money has always been a huge thing in college sports, from TVs to coaches to ADs. And like, it's important to note that most coaches have performance compensation packages worked into their contracts. Like, you win a national championship, you get $100,000 bonus. It's probably much bigger than that. But so yeah, it's like I said earlier, we've got a couple more years, I think, unfortunately, of this kind of gray area ahead of us where everyone is trying to figure things out and no one can agree on what a best path forward is. But I do think this Sluka situation is going to be like an interesting tipping point where when we get 3 years down the line and are looking back on moments that maybe determined whatever the outcome ends up being, this will be something that gets pointed to.
By the way, before we sign off here, Emily, this did happen at Syracuse in a way. Mike Waters and I reported out this story it was early summer when this happened. There was some doubt about Syracuse basketball transfer Eddie Lampkin. He went dark. He erased all his social media. He wasn't talking to the coaching staff. There were other schools that were trying to poach him. Now, this all happened before he stepped foot on campus, right? And eventually he did come. He worked it out, got what he was looking for. And now Eddie Lampkin's a guy who's out in the community. We've seen a lot of videos of him at charitable events out there in the community. Syracuse just had a big Big Brothers Big Sisters event over the weekend where the whole team was there, and he's at practice and all is well. That happened before the season started, though, right? With Sluka, here you have a quarterback who leads a team to 3-0 and walks away because he wasn't, in his eyes, given what he was promised. And I don't think this is going to be the last time we talk about this kind of case, but it's the first at this point, and it's an opponent that Syracuse will face next week. We will be there to chronicle that for you in Vegas. We will be there Saturday after Syracuse takes on Holy Cross for our Syracuse football postgame show on all the channels you're watching now on YouTube, Facebook, on X. If you want to get the podcast later and watch on demand, Syracuse Sports on YouTube, and of course, Spotify and Apple or wherever you get your podcasts as well. Thanks for hanging with us today, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders. As always, thank you, Emily Leiker. And we will talk to you next time, guys. Thanks for hanging with us here on Syracuse Sports.